Hello, everyone, and I hope that your 9th day of January, if that's when you're listening to this, or whatever day you're listening to it, is a good one. If you're starting the day with this podcast, I am so grateful to have you. It is a daily podcast, can't do it without you, and I'm so happy to be joining you in the morning. To all of you morning listeners, I'm very grateful, and I appreciate you. Joining me on today's program, one of our own, our friend Bill Boyle, Bill B in D.C., longtime caller and one of our favorite guests, joins me to talk about the January 6th insurrection and where we are 3 years later, the launch of the Biden campaign in earnest, what it's like to be in D.C. throughout all of this. Another great chat with Bill. That starts at about 21 minutes in. But don't skip the news segment. Don't sleep on this non-award-winning news segment where I read straight through the headlines with just very light, pithy commentary and reaction, and then play you some of the biggest, most important sound clips from yesterday, wherever I can find them. Feel free to tell me what I'm missing. Suggest ideas anytime. standupwithpete@gmail.com. And, of course, that goes for guests, too. But let's get into it. Here are your headlines from the last 24 hours. As always, I choose the stories that I think are the most important and impactful to you, your family, your town, your country, your planet, and your community, not to mention health stories, international stories, and undercovered as well. That is my editorial decision here. We don't do the pop culture, the music, the sports, the other controversies, although today I do have a little bit of audio from the Golden Globes just to have some fun, lighthearted, positive ending here to this news segment. But let's get to the biggest headlines from yesterday. Let's start with the President of the United States, who found himself at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, the site of the racist massacre in June 2015, to make his pitch to black voters in South Carolina. He delivered a campaign address about threats to democracy from the pulpit. President Biden was hoping to remind black voters of the significance of this year's election. In a speech, he condemned Donald Trump, linking his efforts to overturn the 2020 election to the nation's history of white supremacy. I'll play a clip from that in the sound part of the news segment here. Demonstrators interrupted President Biden's South Carolina speech to bring attention to the horror of the Palestinians suffering in Gaza. And speaking of that story, yesterday Israel announced that their military has begun a new and less intense phase of the war, according to the New York Times, against Hamas after weeks of pressure to curtail its large-scale ground and air campaign. Israeli officials privately told their American counterparts that they hoped the transition would be completed by the end of the month. The new phase, they say, would involve fewer airstrikes and fewer troops on the ground, a spokesman for Israel's military said. It also expected to rely more on small groups of elite forces to find and kill Hamas leaders, rescue hostages, and destroy tunnels in Hamas's southern and central strongholds. And one might wonder why that wasn't the strategy to begin with, but that's just a little bit of news from the violence and war in Israel and Gaza. How about this story that broke later last night? Cartoon villain and despicable cuck and criminal Roger Stone, who was convicted of obstruction, witness tampering, and lying to Congress in the Mueller investigation. Prosecutors, of course, sought a 9-year sentence for the longtime insidious Republican operative. But, of course, Donald Trump's Justice Department intervened. This was a huge controversy about the Attorney General at the time, Bill Barr, to impose a less severe sentence, and then Roger Stone's sentence was eventually commuted by Trump. He pardoned him before he was ever to report to prison. Well, apparently, there's audio that exists of Roger Stone making threatening comments about two Democratic lawmakers, Jerry Nadler and Eric Swalwell. Apparently, he is alleged to have said, and there's supposed to be audio, "It's time to do it. Let's go find Swalwell. It's time to do it. Then we'll see how brave the rest of them are. It's time to do it. It's either Nadler or Swalwell has to die before the election. They need to get the message. Let's go find Swalwell and get this over with. I'm not putting up with this shit anymore." So allegedly he said that, Roger Stone. That's what he has said. Mediaite has the tapes. Diana Falzone is supposed to be in possession of the audio tapes. She wrote about it, exclusive at Mediaite last night. Roger Stone threatening to kill two Democratic congressmen to a police officer, apparently. It's crazy, or not. Swalwell and Nadler both on the House Judiciary Committee. They were investigating Roger Stone, who was convicted of federal crimes. But apparently Roger Stone said these things to an actual NYPD cop. I'll wait till more details come out about the story, but I did want to mention it. It is a pretty big deal, especially if there are audio tapes. All right, what else? A U.S. spacecraft malfunctioned on its way to the moon. The first NASA-financed commercial mission to send a robotic spacecraft to the surface of the moon most likely will not be able to make it there. The lunar lander was launched yesterday morning from Florida, Cape Canaveral, inside a new rocket named Vulcan, designed by United Launch Alliance, which is a joint venture between Boeing and Lockheed Martin. And apparently the door flew off of it. I'm kidding. I kid the Boeing airplanes that doors are flying off. No, the rocket's liftoff was flawless, apparently, but then failure in the lander's propulsion system depleted its propellant and most likely ended the mission's original lunar ambitions. That's the way the New York Times writes it up. I mean, I added some flair, obviously, with my jokes. All right, well, in Congress, lawmakers began an uphill push to pass a new bipartisan spending agreement into law in time to avoid a partial government shutdown next week. If you're confused about that, you're not alone. And in the civil corruption trial of Wayne LaPierre, the longtime leader of NRA Association, that began yesterday, which was a pretty big story. Another big story, the Pentagon under pressure to explain the hospitalization of the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Apparently 4 top Pentagon aides knew about the Defense Secretary's hospitalization last week, but waited 2 days to tell the White House. So that looks pretty terrible and bad, stupid and irresponsible and unprofessional, and maybe someone's going to get fired. We'll see. You know who did get fired? The Republican Party chairman of Florida had been voted out. He's facing a criminal sexual assault investigation. His wife, of course, is one of the moms from Liberty co-founders who was anti-gay, and the school board there in Sarasota, but was also gay. It was having gay sex with a lady. 3 ways, as a matter of fact. And their world is coming apart, and they might be criminals. I talked about it with Ron Filipkowski here on the show. And so he is out. And luckily for you, so am I, of headlines. So let's get to that sound I promised you each and every Monday through Thursday, with some exceptions. All right, like I said, here is President Biden yesterday at Mother Emanuel in Charleston, South Carolina, and it was a pretty great speech, interrupted by protesters, but I have 2 clips from it, and in this first one, here is President Biden commenting on the fact that the other day in Iowa, former disgraced President Trump said, you've got to get over the shooting, the killing of a child in a school. He says, you got to get out. You got to get over it. It's terrible, but you got to get over it. So President Biden responded to that and then went on to talk about what he's trying to do to prevent gun violence, which, of course, took the lives of 9 of those parishioners in that church in 2015.
Just a few days ago, the defeated former president was asked about the recent shooting in Iowa. Did you hear this one? It's hard to believe. You know what his response was? All those kids dead. We have to get over it. End of quote. I promise you, we have to get over it. My response is, we have to stop it. So your children, your family, your friends can leave your home, walk the streets, go to stores, go to the grocery store, and go to church to be safe from gun violence. There's no excuse for this carnage. We have to ban assault weapons. I did it once before, and I'm going to come back again and do it. Ban high-capacity magazines. We have to pass a universal background checks. It doesn't violate the Second Amendment. It's common sense, and it saves lives. I'm determined to continue to deliver unequal justice under the law.
All right, and let me just give you this other clip. This is about 2.5 minutes, and this is also pretty powerful, and a lot of people sharing this one yesterday because in this clip, President Biden warned of the stakes that Bill Boyle and I talk a lot about in today's conversation, but he also called Trump a loser, and he really nailed it.
That's why time and again they lost in every court of law that challenged the results. 60 losses in courts of America. There's one thing they don't have. They don't have respect for the 81 million people who voted the other way, voted for my candidacy, and voted to end the presidency. In their world, these Americans, including you, don't count. But that's not the real world. That's not democracy. That's not America. In America, we all count. In America, we witness to serve all those who, in fact, participate. And losers are taught to concede when they lose. And he's a loser. Then we all came together to put the country before ourselves. The lies that led to January 6th are part of a broader attack on the truth of America today that we all have seen before. The same movement that throughout the mob of the United States Capitol isn't just trying to rewrite history, January 6th, they're trying to determine to erase history and your future. Banning books, denying your right to vote and have it counted, destroying diversity, equality, inclusion all across America, harboring hate and replacing hope with anger and resentment and dangerous view of America. That narrow view of America, a zero-sum view of America that says, if you win, I lose. If you succeed, it must be I fail. If you get ahead, I fall behind. And maybe worst of all, if I hold you down, I lift myself up. That's not new in America. Every stride forward has often been met with ferocious backlashes from those who fear the progress, from those who exploit that fear for their own personal gain, from those who traffic in lies told for profit and power.
All right, there you go. That's President Biden yesterday in South Carolina. Another speech, another big speech. He gave one on Friday in Valley Forge, and then this one. And we are off on the presidential campaign. It is pretty much official, everybody. Well, speaking of presidents, I don't know why I had a forced segue in there to get to this clip of Michelle Obama, but I thought this was important. Just a short, brief clip of Michelle Obama on the Jay Shetty podcast talking about how concerned she is for the future of America.
What's going to happen in this next election? I am terrified about what could possibly happen because our leaders matter. Who we select, who speaks for us, who holds that bullied pulpit. It affects us in ways that sometimes I think people take for granted.
Well said by the former First Lady, potentially one of the best First Ladies of all time, certainly of our lifetime, if you ask me. But Michelle Obama laying out the stakes right there. By the way, a lot of people, a lot of the conspiracy theorists think that she's going to decide to run for president at the last minute. And there's, of course, no evidence of that. There's only evidence to the opposite. I don't think anybody's going to be jumping in and putting on their cape, if you will. But it's certainly not going to be Michelle Obama, right? Does anybody think that for any reason at all? It's very popular among the fever dream conspiracy mouth breather types. They're very worried because they know how powerful and popular she is, I suppose. I heard Adam Carolla talking about it yesterday while I was preparing to do an interview with a guest who's going to be on the show tomorrow, Josh Green. And I was surprised he was even on that show, but I listened to it to prepare, and I heard him talking about that theory. Ridiculous. Anyway, Michelle Obama, always great to hear from her wherever she is. I'll have to go listen to that full episode. All right, how about this clip where CNN's Boris Sanchez seems to know more about the Missouri Constitution than the Missouri Secretary of State, Jay Ashcroft, who apparently is saying that he is going to remove Joe Biden from Missouri's ballot. Here we go.
In other words, you think that when the Supreme Court takes this up, they are going to side with President Trump. Is that correct?
They are going to side against people being thrown off the ballot in this sort of manner. The brief that I will be filing with the United States Supreme Court is not going to say that President Trump is a bad person. It's not going to say that he's a good person. What it's going to say is that this extrajudicial means of removing people from the ballot is catastrophic to our country if it's allowed to continue. Because if Democrats can do it, you know that Republicans will do it. And if Republicans will do it, then Democrats will do it more.
To that point, Secretary, in order to remove President Biden from the ballot, according to your state constitution, you would need to go to court. What do you think would be your strongest argument?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Your state constitution actually states that the Secretary of State lacks authority to assess qualifications of a candidate to determine whether to place a candidate's name on a primary ballot. That's according to Section 115.387 of your state constitution.
Sir, what I'm saying is, if the Supreme Court upholds the ruling out of Colorado, and what
which went to court to disqualify Donald Trump from the ballot. So you, according to your state constitution, would need to go to court.
Sir, let's just be clear. First of all, you've already said you're not an attorney and you don't know what happened in Colorado. I
know what happened in Colorado, sir. What I said was that I didn't read through all of the evidence specifically to be able to qualify whether there was hearsay or not. To get back to my question, you said that you would decide to remove Joe Biden from the ballot in your state. According to your state constitution, which I just read to you from, it says you need to go to court. I'm asking you what you think your strongest argument is.
And I continue to try to answer your questions, and you continue to try to tell me stuff that just isn't true.
That's not factual, sir. You made an accusation about me not knowing something. I'm trying to clarify it for you. You can choose to answer the question or just continue deflecting.
All right, well, that didn't go well for the Secretary of State of Missouri, and that got shared widely on social media, so probably a kind of an embarrassing moment for him. That's all the audio I've got for you from politics and yesterday's news. I did, to bring a little bit more fun and lightheartedness to the end of the news segment, grab a few clips from the Golden Globes. I don't like award shows. I don't watch award shows ever live, but I do watch and listen to the clips when there are inspirational moments or speeches or politically high-minded remarks or, train wrecks as well. I'm no better than anybody else, but I did not watch comedian Joe Coy, the host. I know Joe well, and I probably should reach out to him, but I haven't in years, but I apparently his performance was widely panned. It's a really hard gig for a comedian. Celebrities hate laughing at themselves, and I just don't care really too much about that. I didn't see exactly what he said, so I got no comments on that. Just some happy moments, I think, including some firsts. Lily Gladstone was the first Indigenous person to win Best Actress in a Motion Picture Drama. Ali Wong was the first winner of the Asian descent to win Best Actress in a Limited Series. And Stephen Yoon, who you're about to hear from, was the first Korean American to win Best Actor in a Limited Series. This was kind of a poignant one. This is actor Stephen Yoon, who compared himself to Elsa from Frozen in his Golden Globe speech. He won Golden Globe for Best Actor in a Limited Series for his performance in Netflix Beef.
Wow. Thank you so much for this. Thank you to the Golden Globes. It's so weird. The story I usually tell of myself is one of isolation and separateness, and then you come up here and you have this moment and you can only just think about everyone else, and that feels like the plot of Frozen. Shout out to my daughter Ruthie, family movie night. I'm just so thankful. I'm just the recipient of a long line of compassion and love and protection and goodwill. So I appreciate this.
I really love that. I thought that was something you don't hear very often, someone recognizing how great they had it in a way and being the recipient of a long line of passion and love and support, the way he said it. I really like that. Also, Paul Giamatti won yesterday for Best Male Actor in a Motion Picture, in a musical or comedy film, I guess, for the movie Holdovers, which I've heard is very, very good. And I just wanted to play this quick clip because he's a big supporter of teachers and plays a teacher and said this.
Teachers are good people. Got to respect them. They do a good thing. It's a tough job. So this is for teachers as well.
And let me just play a quick clip from Lily Gladstone's speech. This isn't all of it, but she started by speaking the native Blackfeet language, and then I just thought this was probably the best part. She won Best Female Actor in a Motion Picture for her role in Killers of the Flower Moon at last night's Golden Globes.
This award belongs to, and I hope I don't get counted down too fast because this has been a historic one. I'm so grateful that I can speak even a little bit of my language, which I'm not fluent in up here, because in this business, Native actors used to speak their lines in English, and then the sound mixers would run them backwards to accomplish Native languages on camera. This is an historic win. It doesn't belong to just me. I'm holding it right now. I'm holding it with all of my beautiful sisters and the film at this table over here, and my mother, Tantu Cardinal, standing on all of your shoulders. Thank you. Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Leo. Thank you, Bob. You are all changing things. Thank you for being such allies. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Chief Standing Bear, and big ol' Wewina to Wajaje Osage Nation.
All right, very, very cool moment at last night's Golden Globes, and I like that, so I wanted to share those with you. Okay, well, now, let's get to my guest on today's program, and don't forget, I can't do these shows every day without your support. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. This is ad-free, independent of any other affiliation with any other organization at all. You, the subscriber, support me and this work where I can talk to these very smart, well-informed, credible people each and every day. So thank you very much for that. Bill Boyle is one of our big supporters and started as a listener and a caller to the old show, and now has become one of your favorite guests. He, of course, is a business owner. He owns parking garages in Washington, D.C. He grew up in New Jersey. His dad was a famous judge in New Jersey, and he has lived quite an interesting life. He married the daughter of refugees from Vietnam. They have one son in D.C., Finn, who often hangs out with us at the Hangouts. Bill's up in there. We just absolutely love Bill. You can follow him on Twitter, on Blue Sky, and more. Find him in D.C. Find more in the show notes. Let's do it with my latest conversation with Bill B. in D.C. It's time for Bill Boyle. All right, there he is. Bill Boyle, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to me. I wanted to talk to you about the anniversary of January 6th, 3 years. This is the third anniversary of January 6th, and we're headed into a campaign year. There were a lot of journalists that covered 2020 and said this is the craziest campaign I'll ever cover because of Trump. But this one is going to be crazier because of Trump, it's fair to say, and because of what people believe and don't believe about what took place on January 6th. And the reason that matters, obviously, is because he's up for some serious penalties, crimes in both federal court, the Department of Justice, and in Georgia, Fulton County. So January 6th is going to be with us our rest of our lives, but certainly very preeminent this year. Thoughts about where we are 3 years later?
I would say what my thought about where we are 3 years later is I'm surprised at how much contestation there is over the meaning, how much is contested about what actually happened. You know, maybe because I live here and I saw it and I had friends on the Hill who I was talking to who were barricaded in their offices holding freaking paperweights, right? I mean, so to me here, you know, it's right up in front of you because we saw it and we saw the immediate, you know, prelude and the immediate aftermath. It to me is the most important thing that happened in Washington in my adult life. No question about it, because it was an actual attempt to overthrow the government. And the fact that is contested in a pretty serious way, both actively and passively. You know, there's the active contestation of somebody like Lauren Boebert or the Republicans or Elise Stefanik saying, no, the people who arrested are hostages. And that was never a coup. And there were Antifa and FBI in the crowd fomenting the whole thing. That I sort of understand because these people are grotesque reactionary partisans, and you'd imagine they would do that.
Ghouls.
I'm a little more grossed out by how regular people who are not politically there, they're not particularly worried about it either. Not really talking about it. You know, you read, and I'm not just pointing out the media, although the media is the most obvious example of that, where it was a very muted third anniversary of a coup attempt in America. It's a very muted anniversary. There were no people downtown lighting candles about it. There were no.
The president launched his campaign on that day on purpose in Valley Forge for the symbolism of it all. He says that's the impetus for him running. You know, that's what they're running on. That is the end of democracy, or me, Joe Biden, who's had a pretty goddamn good first term. But that being said, the misinformation campaign that led by Trump and the right-wing echo chamber on YouTube and podcasts and Fox and all the rest of these right-wing cable news has clouded people's memories. I mean, what do you say to the fact that so many people don't believe that what happened and who was there? And, some people think it's Antifa or crisis actors or the FBI. Obviously, it can't be all three of them. I mean, it's preposterous. All of those conspiracy theories are crazy, but a lot of people believe them, Bill.
Well, they believe them because, it's the nature of sort of hardcore reactionary movements, or especially fascist or proto-fascist or semi-fascist movements, to basically flood the zone with bullshit. The German, the big lie under Goebbels, you name it, whoever you're talking about in that sort of political milieu, that's what they do because the people that support them don't care about the truth. They care about a truth with a capital T, which is that white people or real Americans or non-Jews or whatever are justified to do anything to support their political view because they intrinsically, because of who they are and where they're from or what language they speak or what their ethnicity is, are intrinsically so much better that there is no need to debate the facts. There is only one fact. The Volk, the real America, whatever, that's what matters. And any tactic that you can take to support the political dominance of that thing is considered to be perfectly okay. And, they very happily bullshit themselves, right? They are happy to bullshit themselves. They're happy to listen to anyone else's as long as it justifies what they want. It provides them with some stance that they are in a heroic mode or in a movement. And people who need that kind of validation, to them, the truth with a small t is a very small price to pay.
The Department of Justice, really great analysis by you there, psychoanalysis, really. But the Department of Justice has now arrested and brought to trial over 1,000. I think it's almost 1,400. The numbers about what happened that day, they put out a fact sheet. I did a little looking, and they put out a fact sheet. How many police officers were assaulted, how much damage was done in the millions and millions of dollars and so on. And they're obviously now going after the architects. Many of the architects have even flipped the people that are involved in all these different cases. And so I wonder if you think that the Department of Justice, not to mention the January 6th committee, so Congress, the executive branch, could be doing anything more than they are to hold those responsible for January 6th, despite the fact that certainly frighteningly a large percentage of Americans don't even believe it happened the way it did, obviously, or that it wasn't a crime, or that it wasn't what it was for.
Right. So doing what I do and living where I live, we actually see plenty of evidence the DOJ is working quite hard on arresting these people. I think the estimate a month or two after January 6th was that maybe they could arrest about 700 people. And the last number I saw that were confirmed arrested was something like 1,200, and I've also heard 1,400. They are drawing a very fine net, and they are going and getting everybody they possibly can. And this is sort of a thing that people don't like. They bitch about Merrick Garland. Merrick Garland went after Trump as quickly as he could while observing the rules of the DOJ. And the DOJ in general has done definitely 100% on that with the January 6th folks. Enrique Tarrio, what did he get? 20 years? They're not fucking around. But again, people on the left don't love the FBI. So they're not valorizing this at all, right? And people in the middle, and this gets it, by the way, I started to say before that people who should know better, people who should be really exercised about this stuff, they're it's like the people who bitch about Biden, and they're kind of like, well, he's okay. People I'm saying in the center and the left who do that. There's this weird disconnect between the stakes, between what's been accomplished, and their reaction to it.
Not sure if there's a disconnect as much as there is a lack of or even a misunderstanding. But
yeah, I just think that things worked out and people just assume they will continue to.
Yeah, well, that is the American condition for a lot of us, I think.
That's right. And the time for Americans to rest on the laurels of our democratic tradition is over.
Well, yeah, but how has any country prepared people for that or done a better job to illustrate and create the stakes. Like, we try to do that, I think, as well as we can, many of us in the media, without creating a certain kind of fear and paranoia, but to be as serious as we can. I mean, I'm not sure in history, maybe you'll have an example of how any country could say, look what's happening. This is what's happening. We've got to prepare for it. I think so many great historians and authoritarian experts on authoritarianism, many of which I know you read and respect, Tim Snyder, Ruth Ben-Ghiat, and others, have done their best. And obviously, Democrats, I think, are doing a lot of their best. I think a lot in the media are. So what else could be done to ring the bell for people, the stakes? Because I feel like, especially young folks, don't quite understand.
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't even know. I mean, I think it's in your personal life you have to tell that to people who don't want to hear it. I really do. And I think there needs to be like a movement of that where you tell people, because, you know, the media is okay, but a lot of the media is ridiculous, supine, and still both sidesing it. New York Times prominently. But, you know, there are historical examples of fascist movements being stopped in their tracks. I've talked to you before about, you know, February 1934, there was a real proper attempt at a coup in France by the right. And after that coup, the parties on the left united and they kept the right-wingers out. And they were quite fascist, not Boulanger, but the Champagne heir, whose name escapes me. Like they were really, Croix de Feu, they had these really big fascist movements that had a lot of power, street fighters, the whole deal. They also had a big communist chunk that was inimical to the state and to the middle class and everybody else, these are all the conditions that happened in Germany. But in France, it did not lead to the fascists because the left stuck together. The left and the middle said, we won't fucking allow this. And from 1934 until 1940, they did a great job of keeping the right out.
I'm not sure that's happening.
And they lost the war.
I'm not sure that's happening here.
And that's exactly my point, is that in America right now, you know, you see this weird lack of understanding about what's at stake. And you know, there's a guy named Ernst Thälmann, who was a German communist. And he promulgated, Stalin told him to, and he promulgated this thing called social fascism. And social fascism is this idea: you're on the far left, you look at somebody in the middle or on the left, just to the right of you on the left, and you say, oh, they're just as bad as the fascists because they're not left-wing enough. And so what that does is it splits the left. Everybody in the left gets split.
That I see happen.
Oh, you totally see that. And here's the kicker. You're going to love this. Ernst Thälmann's battle cry during this time was, after Hitler, us. Could also be translated as after Hitler, our turn in German. And what it meant was that we're gonna totally fuck up the liberal democracy here. And when Hitler gets over, you know, comes into power, he's going to piss people off so much that they're going to turn to the left and we're going to win. That is exactly the position of someone like Susan Sarandon. It's the guys, Matt Bruenig or Jimmy Dore, like this idea that if, you know, we're liberal democracy, it's too weak, it's too bullshit. And the people just to the right of us, they're effectively just fascists themselves. Yeah. Yeah. Right. And in the U.S., we're watching that right now. We're watching
it's very
idiotic people.
It's all media driven, though. That's the thing that I find fascinating about today's Democratic Party. Nobody talks about this. They're in so many ways unified on so many important messages and ideas and policies. No one's questioning how serious the stakes are. That is currently a member of the House of Representatives or a United States Democratic senator. They all know because they all have to run their campaigns and they know what they're up against. Anybody that's involved with a campaign knows how hard it is to do, knows how much work and money you got to raise. The idea that you could win it and then it could be overturned because the other people didn't like you is super frustrating if taking out the danger and the horror of it. So the point is, they're very aware of what can be done, what was done last time. The unity in the Democratic Party, I think, is very impressive. It's not that. It's the left-wing media, the independent media, some of the names you mentioned, but especially a lot more.
some of the ex-Bernie people are like this. Cenk Uyghur is like this.
Yeah. They're making money off clicks and getting the people divided. And then there's these bitter people that have watched Democrats their whole lives. And I beg people to say, look at today's Democrats. They're pretty unified on this threat that Bill and so many other people have been warning about, that I certainly obviously agree.
There's a reason that AOC toes the party line all the time.
She helped create and influence the party. She brought the line over to where it is now. Above, whatever you want to describe it.
She brought it some degree to where she is, but in a lot of ways it didn't go that far. But she knows, because she's not an idiot, Democrats, stick together or hang separately is where we are.
Yeah.
And that is really that's the stakes, where these people on the left who are like, I'm not getting the climate change legislation I want right now. I'm not the criminal justice reform I don't want right now. I'm not getting what I want right now. Well, if you let Trump win, you're never getting it.
You'll get none of it.
If you're upset with the Biden policy towards Israel and Gaza, which is a perfectly acceptable thing to be, and by the way, you could be upset with them on the right and the left about the humanitarian part of it. Totally acceptable. But if you vote for Trump or you don't vote for Biden and Trump wins, you're going to get a far nastier, worse outcome. And what's crazy about it is
that's true of all the issues, no matter what you care about, from healthcare to employment opportunities to abortion and guns to immigration and climate. Voting, most importantly, is number one. It's number one. Democracy has got to be number one. And I hate that. I miss those days when we could talk about and argue and propose. I mean, I'm still listening to a lot of these programs and shows and talking to people and reading people that are doing the work of policy at the state, local, and obviously federal level. It is happening. It's just we have to talk about the most important issue first, and that is the dawn of democracy in America and unfortunately in too many other places as well. So that's what we're doing. January 6th, you said darkest day in Washington history. One could argue one of the darkest days in our generation or even American history, but certainly it is up there. People don't look at it maybe as that because there wasn't a slaughter, it wasn't a terrorist attack or something like that, like what we saw on 9/11, or Sandy Hook, a mass shooting in a school. Those are dark days. But I think when people talk about January 6th, what do you mean? And what do you think when we talk about it being one of the darkest days? You said in D.C., I'm arguing in American history, certainly in our lifetime.
In political history, sure. And since the Civil War, of which in some ways it's an echo.
Well, a lot of people are talking certainly about that too, historians. Yeah.
Right. But I'll give you some anecdotes, right? And January 6th doesn't start on January 5th, right? The antecedents were building up for 2 or 3 years as Trump was getting crazier and nastier to protesters. Protesters on some on the left, but a lot on the right were getting more aggressive and more active against
the big lie
police.
Starts with him saying, if I lose, it will be because, and he started saying that years before the election.
The big lie about how the election was being stolen, et cetera, right? Well, he loses the election in November. Fair and square. There's no evidence at all that he did not lose, honestly. But of course, he fights that. He starts telling people, what was it? Go there and get wild. He was saying about January 6th?
Well, first of all, everybody that mattered told him that he lost, everybody. And so he just dismissed them, pushed them aside until he could find people would tell him what he wanted to hear. And those people clearly, Giuliani, Pillow Boy, and the rest wanted to profit off of the access they got to the president, off of all of it, and now many of them are going to jail. So, I mean, just to be clear, his people did tell him that he lost.
But what I'm getting at is sort of the vibe of the city, and what I saw happening was a harbinger for what a second Trump administration would be like. And for instance, on December 12th, I've told you the story. I ride my kid and I, it's a warm December day, we ride our bikes to the mall. No idea there's a big Proud Boy march going on. Some guy yells a racial slur at my kid. We see people with swastikas and Confederate flags marching around in front of the menorah, in front of the White House. The cops clearly feel like they can't confront them, right? So they're just trying to separate people, but they're not arresting any of these Proud Boys because they know that the White House will take over the police department in D.C., which it can and would if Trump had felt like the cops were beating up on his boys, right? So December 12th is this huge mess. fist fights all over town, random passersby being hit, just terrible. We get up to January 5th, and businesses are closing down all over the city because they can feel what's coming. And a neighbor of mine lives next to an Airbnb. I don't know the neighbor, but it's somebody who lived near my house. And they have a pride flag on their front stoop. And the night of January 5th, I don't know if people remember, there were all kinds of fistfights, Proud Boys attack, like that. They tore down that, I think they tore down that banner from the Black Lives Matter church. Like there was all kinds of confrontations with the police the night of the 5th. And what these guys staying in the Airbnb said to the people in that house with the pride flag, as they went downtown that night for the festivities, they said, "We're coming for you next." This guy didn't provoke him. This guy wasn't doing anything. He kind of waved, "Oh, hey, what's up?"
Yeah.
They literally made a statement of like, this is mob rule, jackboot SS kind of SA kind of bullshit they were doing. They go downtown that night. There's all these fights, whatever. It was really highly reminiscent of the things you read about 1930s Germany. 33, 34, before the Nazis really had locked everything down. Where there, you see street fights, you see mobs dressed in uniforms, like in cadence, marching down the street, intimidating the police. You see the civil authorities kind of locked up and not knowing what to do because they want to arrest all these guys, but they can't because if they arrest all these guys, the civil authority goes away completely. You saw a city that was stuck on this sort of balance where there was no good answer to what they could do.
You say that, is it an overwrought comparison to the 30s simply because it only was for that month's period, that kind of activity versus a longer period of time, consistency of that behavior? I mean, couldn't it just been a few nights of hooligans that like, "Oh, you're next," a couple drunk Proud Boys?
No, this started in 2017 and just slowly accelerated all the way through to 2019 and 2020. This was not a short-term thing.
Nationwide, it certainly wasn't, and I don't know about DC, but certainly there was.
DC. It was fairly consistent. Every other weekend or so, you'd hear another thing, or you'd be riding your bike downtown, and some guy would yell at your half Asian kid. Right? Shocked me that like this super open racism and by the way, in the middle of all this, over the course of those 2 years, there were left wing or even centrist protests where Trump was bringing in the riot squad from the Bureau of Prisons in Texas, bringing in the Border Patrol SWAT teams to do security around the White House.
Well, let me just get to that point real quick, because a lot of times people argue, you hear Republican congressmen and many folks on the right arguing immediately when we talk about January 6th and how horrible it was, they'll talk about Black Lives Matter protests. And that's always been such an upsetting comparison, simply because the Black Lives Matter protests are simply an outgrowth of the entire history of this country's civil rights movement, anti-police brutality movement. It's just this generation's version of it. It's what it is. People saw George Floyd be murdered during the pandemic on TV. There's obviously a long history of these high-profile killings of black people by police officers. There's brutality all the time. Forget about killings. That was a real grievance. It's been a lifelong grievance, an American history grievance, and that was what that was. So say what you want about it, have whatever opinion you want on it. It is a real thing that had been happening throughout this country's history. The protests on January 6th, the riot and insurrection on January 6th, was about a lie. All those people lost their jobs, their lives, their reputation for a lie, for a thing that wasn't happening, that didn't happen. And it's so interesting, if not terrifying, to think that you could go to fight for an army, fight a war or a revolution, and have a grievance about a thing that didn't happen. A stolen election didn't happen.
Well, this is, the people who...
It's not like we have different
slavery.
Views on it. It didn't happen. The election wasn't stolen. And I'm banging on the Capitol door and through windows, screaming. I understand it. If I believed that, I'd be mad too.
Sure. The Civil War, the people who defended slavery at the beginning of the Civil War, you know what they just defended it on? What auspices? They said it was liberty. I'm not kidding. Read all the
liberty
announcements
to
that
be
they were
enslaved.
No, liberty for white men to own slaves.
Oh, excuse me. Yes, sure.
No, it would. So
isn't that what Nikki Haley described it? Isn't that how Nikki Haley?
Almost. Well, you heard what I said about her. You know, it's the cornerstone speech. She just left out the cornerstone.
The main part.
You know, right. So, you know, there's always a lie. There's always a lie to any sort of crazy fascist, whatever. I mean, the superiority of Germans. Come on, I've been to Germany. Give me a fucking break. I mean, it's a ridiculous.
Yeah, I hear you.
Ridiculous seat at the center of every reactionary movement. A golden age, a intrinsically better nationality, a language that is somehow superior to all others. There's always always just like a very arbitrary thing that is supposed to be what we're fighting about.
I mean, the Iraq War was a lie. The Iraq War was a lie.
The Iraq War was a lie.
All those men and women that went and fought in Iraq, that was a lie.
I agree. It's a lie that I bought for the first 6 months.
Shame on you.
I know it. Yeah, I'm a little ashamed of that. Yeah. I believed in Colin Powell. That was I didn't think he would lie to me. I
don't think he thought he was lying. I think he believed George Tenet.
Yeah, maybe.
I told him when I go and testify at the UN, you're going to sit right behind me, George.
Yeah, that's
this
true.
Intelligence better be good, motherfucker. Yep.
I will tell you that what I saw personally, because I saw a lot of these protests. I work downtown DC all the time.
So in the run up to January 6th, or
for the whole period of Trump's White House, there were people on the left behaving like complete assholes, doing protests, but it was the exception. And I personally watched as some black what do you call that, black banner, black whatever, the Antifa guys who wear the masks.
Block. I don't know.
Black bloc, thank you. I watched some black bloc guys pulling up bricks from the sidewalk to throw at the police, get grabbed by BLM guys, dragged over to the police, and the BLM guys handing it to the cops and saying, "This is the guy who just threw that brick."
Yeah, those guys aren't always on the same page for sure.
Well, yeah, and I mean, what we saw were like the black bloc guys burning the lobby of the Teamsters headquarters, smashing the windows of like the United Teachers Federation, like. Just there were a lot of riot tourists in DC who were not really ideologically driven. They were bored teenagers who were getting out of their house during COVID.
That's very condescending towards those ideologically driven, radicalized youth.
I watched them and they act like. And by the way, I had some confrontations with people who were like, "Oh, look at the narc," and getting in my face, and then having BLM people run over and be like, leave him alone. He's just a guy.
To be fair, we all think that about you, but go ahead.
That's true. Yeah. Well, I'm not a narc if I'm open to that, but so there were a lot of assholes, it was a shitty situation. The flies come, right? But at the same time, I thought BLM in DC, which is what I saw, they seemed pretty awfully behaved to me. Part of that may also be that the police department in DC is broadly sympathetic people in the middle on the left rather than people on the right. So there wasn't this intense confrontation. And in fact, the DC police were often going out of their way to protect these folks from uniformed Secret Service, from the, border security guys and whatever. There was real tension. And again, this gets at.
Oh, that's right. They had those guys. They had border security like running around in vans snatching people, didn't they?
They did. And the DC police were often foiling them.
That was scary as hell. That's crazy.
That's a very 1930s thing.
Oh, yeah.
Different police agencies with different political tendencies are actually coming close to confrontation.
Did anybody do any good journalism on that and figure out who ordered that? Who was doing that? That was a crazy thing to have a federal agency out there. I read. I believe they were unmarked vans and stuff going and bagging people or something.
Oh, I never saw that. But what they were doing, they were doing stuff like they came up to my neighborhood in DC because they thought they were going to go into arrest. They thought they were going to catch a bunch of people who were illegal at like this like outdoor market. And they got there and carded everybody. Nobody was illegal.
Undocumented people.
Undocumented, excuse me. And then they started going into restaurants and trying to get people who were sitting down eating lunch to show their ID to prove they were documented.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
That's my neighborhood. So like you have border security. We're real far away from any border, and they're like going into restaurants and going to people who look Latino and saying, "Hey, show me your papers."
Yeah, you can't do that.
Well, they did it. they did it. And the DC police showed up and started going, whoa, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Yeah.
But that gets at like, maybe DC was an unusual place. Maybe things were here happening more than anywhere else. But I think that's going to be a national problem if Trump wins again.
Well, it's certainly going to be a huge part of the problem if he were to win again. We're just weeks away from the Iowa caucuses, and we just saw President Biden launch his campaign, and we're going to see all these trials play out coinciding with Republican primaries. Who knows what could happen with these two elderly gentlemen, their health. Obviously, there's still a lot of time left, but I mean, we are in it, and President Joe Biden has just launched his campaign with a big speech last week. What are your thoughts about what clearly the direction of the campaign is to focus on what we've been talking about, the threat that is to democracy? Are economic populists and center-left American voters going to be thinking about that the way you and I think that they should? Is this a good strategy? It worked last time.
Well, it's worked for the last 3 cycles, right? Talking about the stakes, talking about what Trump
Democrats are winning everywhere. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's abortion, if it's democracy, if it's guns. I don't know.
Right. And so, if you're in politics, like, people overthink this stuff. If something's working, you keep doing it. Right. There's not like, it's very rare that someone goes, we just won 3 cycles, killed in 3 cycles. And let's not do that anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
Bench LeBron.
Exactly. And Trump has been continuing to do what Trump does. The only difference is the level of press scrutiny for the caustic, terrible, un-American things he's doing, or, how high it is or how low it is. And for a while, there was very little of it. And so his numbers get better and he does okay. But as time goes on, if you're Biden, it makes total sense. Talk about the stakes, talk about who this guy is, talk about what he did to you before. It's what's that line, David Bowie? It's something about President Nixon.
You're asking the wrong guy.
We had to pay only yesterday, right? Like, the whole point is, if this guy has some terrible things, make sure everybody knows about him and provoke him to say more of them. It's a totally good strategy. It's smart. And, Biden is not that popular, but Biden is at his bottom. Trump is kind of near his peak already. So all Biden has to do is come up somewhat, and he wins fairly handily. So it's a smart move. And by the way, people aren't going to love Biden because Biden's doing a rather excellent job. But he's not a Barack Obama. He's not a Newsom. He's not a Bill Clinton. He doesn't have that, and he's older. He doesn't have that sort of charisma that makes people go, wow, this guy's great. If you look at the numbers, you look what he's done, you look at how well he's been president, he's been awesome.
People don't, though, pay as much attention to that, obviously, as they should. Everybody's trying to figure out why the perception isn't better given the state of the economy, and we could talk about a lot of other things, including the rebound from COVID and how that was managed and so on. Let me just real quick, I should have asked you earlier as we were talking about it, but what do you make of Donald Trump calling J6ers hostages, and then Elise Stefanik, who everybody says is volunteering or auditioning for vice president, also calling J6ers hostages, and to an anchor on NBC, Kirsten Welker, who got a lot of grief for not pushing back on that. Yeah. What do you make of the hostage rhetoric, which just, I think follows along with the rest of the plan here? But that is a really interesting choice right now, given what's happening in Israel and Gaza and hostages. Hostages?
Well, so the whole idea here is to make what anyone else does illegitimate. You're delegitimizing your opposition. You're delegitimizing any punishment for anybody who has done something extremist for you, right? And Trump has made it clear that he's going to pardon all those people if he wins the White House again.
Yeah.
So he is.
And Nikki Haley made it clear she'd pardon Trump if she wins the White House.
Right. But Trump is explicitly trying to create an extremist movement. And, I hate to say like he's no Adolf Hitler, but he is no Adolf Hitler, right? He doesn't have the free corps and a bunch of other things Hitler had to impose his will on the politics of Weimar Germany. But Trump is certainly angling or hoping to get or to retain the loyalty of people who will commit violence on his behalf. And I don't think we need to think it through all that much. If Trump could win by violence tomorrow, there'd be blood running in the streets.
Yes, no doubt about it. He would command his people, but he doesn't have that kind of command. Do you think that any thoughts on what the Supreme Court, didn't he basically threaten Brett Kavanaugh the other day I think you better make the right decision.
I appointed him, and he owes me.
He owes me. He owes me big, Brett. You owe me big.
I would say that that's a stupid thing for him to do, like profoundly stupid thing for him to do, because Kavanaugh lives in Potomac. Kavanaugh has a lot of liberal friends. Kavanaugh is one of those guys. My prediction is, as he gets older, he gets more liberal in his jurisprudence, particularly once Trump is off the. I'm not saying he's going to be a liberal, but he's going to become less right wing.
He still got that axe to grind. Remember, he said,
that axe gets softer over time, and he still lives in Potomac. The guy didn't move to Fairfax County. He still lives like in this very liberal enclave where he still has lots of friends and everything else.
Still has daughters maybe in his ear. I don't know. I like
and he grew up there. Like this is not a guy who came here from New Mexico's that country. So I think that that's a mistake for him to do, because I think it provokes Kavanaugh into saying, man, if I go and hook this guy up, I'm going to look like I'm a stooge. And he's a lifetime appointment. It's not like Trump can go get him out.
Right.
And I think that that's true of Amy Coney Barrett as well. I think that's also true with Gorsuch, that Trump hurts himself with these people because they don't want to be seen as his stooges at all.
Any chance they keep him off the ballot? Any chance they decide he cannot be on these ballots and that these 14 or so states can remove him?
Right. So I was talking with some folks about this the other night at great length. There was beer involved, but still. I think it's unlikely that they say he's off, but I don't think it's impossible.
Right.
Because if I'm a conservative justice and I'm looking at somebody that if Trump wins again, for instance, he's just going to go do things. And when the Supreme Court says you can't do that, he's going to say, well, then try to enforce it.
Right.
And they are then going to lose their power.
And so for purposes of self-preservation.
For self-preservation of the institution that I think even some of them who I really don't like.
And they know Nikki Haley has a better chance, or anybody has a better chance of beating Joe Biden.
So that it would not shock me.
Right.
Would not shock me. At the same time, there's arguments to be made. John Gans makes this argument that oftentimes when Democratic states get into trouble or fail, they take very undemocratic steps to try to stop the threat to the Democratic state, and then they further weaken it.
Right. So by taking this step to preserve democracy,
they might hurt it. And it seems like what you call an undemocratic step, other people might say, well, they're enforcing the Constitution here. Which, by the way, the Constitution can be undemocratic. It had slavery in it for a long time, right? I mean, I'm not saying that. It's saying you can't run for president if you led or were part of an insurrection. You're disqualified. It's saying you're disqualified if you did this or that, but that would look like an undemocratic move is one way of it certainly landing on a lot of American citizen voters. Right. And I think that
you had to remove him from the ballot. You couldn't let there be a fair race.
It could hurt us down the road. And at the same time, the way to kill an authoritarian is to make him lose. Make him lose at the ballot box. That's the best possible way to kill off an authoritarian movement. Make them just lose to democracy in its purest way we can get it done.
So some people might see the Supreme Court as Tanya Harding.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Say that again. I totally missed that.
Tanya Harding couldn't beat Nancy Kerrigan fair and square, so she hired a guy to club her.
That's true. So, yeah, this would be...
Can't believe that went over your and probably a lot of...
boyfriend.
Jeff Gillooly. I know his name. Why? You know about the Weimar Republic, and I know Jeff Gillooly.
Jeff Gillooly. Nice. Damn. That's a deep cut.
I have no idea why it stayed. I just thought that was one of the craziest American stories of my...
And was it Nancy Kerrigan? Was
20s, yes.
All right. So I do remember. I knew who Tanya Harding was, but
Gillooly. We'll see what happens with the Supreme Court. But I guess in conclusion... The last question I think is worth asking. A lot could come out during these trials. Jack Smith has phone calls. He's got witnesses like Mark Meadows. Christie says everywhere he goes, in every appearance, he mentions the fact that Mark Meadows flipped. He seems to think we could learn something. I'm not sure it'll flip any Trump voter, but I think the outcome could be that people will be like, you know what? I'm just less interested in this guy. I'm not as, I don't know. Who knows what the outcomes could be, but we will learn a lot more. At least, as you've said many times, it's going to be in the news cycle day after day at some, it's hard to know exactly what day the primary is. This primary, well, you would never, you know, when day the primary is, but you don't know what'll be happening in court, in trial on that day. But it could be something explosive on the day people are going to vote for Donald Trump. Then's the day we find out that he said this, he did that, he paid this guy. The Chinese were paying him, apparently.
I think if he gets convicted, period, it's probably over. Because I think there's polling out there that shows quite a number of moderate conservatives go,
Which could he could get convicted in D.C. federal court during the summer, possibly before the RNC, possibly, or
yeah, but you know what? They're not going to overthrow him. They are so whipped because their voters are pro-Trump. I mean, so
you're saying if he gets convicted, he'll still get the nomination at the RNC?
No question. No question about it.
At his way during the sentencing phase.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about...
Well, during appeals, I guess.
John Gantz talks about this, that like calling Trump a fascist, like attaches too much sort of dark grandeur to him, right? It makes him a bigger figure than he really is.
Right.
It as Gantz puts it, most fascist leaders are morons with global pretensions. And what actually matters is that 45 or 50% of the Republican Party is effectively fascist or curious or interested or have that habit of voting. And so the issue has never been Trump himself. There have been people like Trump around forever, and there always are, and there's 5,000 more out there. The question is whether the right guy is in the right place for the movement, the wave of that movement to pick him up and carry him along. And that's it. You know, Trump is not the speech maker of Winston Churchill, right? He's not the strategist of Vladimir Lenin.
He said the other day, he said Joe Biden, who did he say? Oh, Nikki Haley. She's a globalist. She likes the globe. That's what he said. She likes the globe was one of the, and he said he's going to put a dome over the country, I think.
He said, he's going to put a dome over the United States. Like, we can all suffocate together. It's going to be awesome. So I actually said the speechmaker of Winston Churchill. Now I'm embarrassed. I meant Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was an absolutely spellbinding speaker, at least, for everything else that was utterly disgusting and depraved and awful about him. You know, most global leaders, Mao was just like an incredible organizer and politician and whatever. Trump is none of those things. Trump is a salesman and a con man.
And he's only getting worse at what he was good at in terms of his speeches and rhetoric. And, he can't even keep the attention of the trolls, the orcs at his rallies.
This perversely is why he'll end up still getting an RNC nomination. Because they'll give him the nomination because they're terrified of their own voters. If he was just a pol and a skillful pol, he could be outmaneuvered that way at a RNC convention.
But he's actually a force.
There's nothing to outmaneuver because these guys know the voters will punish them if they do it.
Well,
and that's it.
It's going to be a crazy year, and I'm glad that we have you here along with us as one of our many great voices and sources of thinking to talk through it all. I'll let you go. I appreciate it very, very much. It's real good stuff, as always. Well, anything else, actually, before I let you go? Anything else you want to say, Bill, watching on this or anything else?
Okay. I'm just going to, I need to catch up on my sleep, work hard, and get to the weekend to drink a beer. That's all.
Please take. Are you not drinking beer during the week?
No, I don't normally.
Oh, you don't? Oh, yeah. I don't really either.
I'm not one of those guys who goes home and has like a beer with dinner. I never do that.
Yeah, I used to. But when I moved here to the suburbs, but now my first beer of the week usually is Thursday to hang out.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right, but it's always a good one. It's always a high quality beer. So
it is. It's a Bud Light, which you shouldn't even mop your floor with. But okay, fine.
Wow. Bill Boyle, everybody, thank you so much. Go buy Bud Light. I got to do a live read. We'll be right back.
So long.
There he goes, Bill Boyle, everybody. Bill B in D.C. I hope you learned a lot from his perspective, his views on things. I always do. Love to get it, and so many of you do as well. Go find him and thank him. Easy to find. Just go to the show notes or hang out with us on Thursday where he usually joins us, or head to D.C. He'll buy you a beer. That's Bill B in D.C. Thank you very much, William. Always appreciate you, and thank you for listening. For writing a review, go write a review on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen. Subscribe to me on all the social media outlets. I'm on all of them. You name it. I'm on it. Got to post clips of these interviews this week. Always a lot of work to do. I can't do it without your support. So thank you. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. John Carroll's going to be joining us in Vegas, March 22nd, 2030. He's headlining, everybody. I hope to see you there for PodFest. I'll be there with JL Coben, Christian Finnegan, Ophira Eisenberg, Gareth Sever. Set to join us. And, of course, John Carroll sings this baby in and out. We'll all get to see him sing it live. Cannot wait. I'll write it. We'll do it live. Let's do it. John Carroll right now.
Stand up. That's right. We got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. Alright, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.